The withdrawal of consent, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, commentary, video, and resource. We shall seek to get as much of this as possible. We're running low on storage, so with nothing further to do, we shall get back to the notes and source materials.
After fantastic schemes of social blessings, and have never noticed that these schemes kept on producing a worse and never a better state of the universal relations which are the basis of human life. 3. The whole force of our principles and methods will lie in the fact that we shall present them and expound them as a splendid contrast to the dead and decomposed old order of things in social life. 4. Our philosophers will discuss all the shortcomings of the various beliefs of the Goyim, but no one will ever bring under discussion our faith from its true point of view, since this will be fully learned by none save ours. WHO will never dare to betray its secrets.
World Health
5.
Organization.
In countries known as progressive and enlightened, we have created a senseless, filthy, abominable literature. For some time after our entrance to power, we shall continue to encourage its existence in order to provide a telling relief by contrast to the speeches, party program, which will be distributed from exalted quarters of ours. Our wise men, trained to become leaders of the Goyim, will compose speeches, projects, memoirs, articles, which will be used by us to influence the minds of the Goyim, directing them towards such understanding and forms of knowledge as have been determined by us. Protocol No. 15. 1. When we at last definitely come into our kingdom by the aid of coups d'état prepared everywhere for one and the same day, after definitely acknowledged, and not a little time will pass before that comes about, perhaps even a whole century, we shall make it our task to see that against us such things as plots shall no longer exist. With this purpose we shall slay without mercy all who take arms in hand to oppose our coming into our kingdom. Every kind of new institution of anything like a secret society will also be punished with death. Those of them which are now in existence, are known to us, serve us and have served us, we shall disband and send into exile to continents
David.
far removed from Europe.
Life in prison.
In this way
from
we shall
infancy.
proceed with those Goy Masons. WHO know too much. Such of these as we may for some reason spare will be kept in constant fear of exile. We shall promulgate a law making all former members of secret societies liable to exile from Europe as the center of rule. 2. Resolutions of our government will be final, without appeal. 3. In the Goy societies, in which we have planted and deeply rooted discord and Protestantism, the only possible way of restoring order is to employ merciless measures that prove the direct force of authority. No regard must be paid to the victims who fall, they suffer for the well-being of the future. The attainment of that well-being, even at the expense of sacrifices, is the duty of any kind of government that acknowledges as justification for its existence not only its privileges but its obligations. The principal guarantee of stability of rule is to confirm the aureole of power, and this aureole is attained only by such a majestic inflexibility of might as shall carry on its face the emblems of inviolability from mystical causes, from the choice of God. Such was, until recent times, the Russian autocracy, the one and only serious foe we had in the world, without counting the papacy. Bear in mind the example when Italy, drenched with blood, never touched a hair of the head of Sulla, who had poured forth that blood. Sulla enjoyed an apotheosis for his might in him, but his intrepid return to Italy ringed him round with inviolability. The people do not lay a finger on him who hypnotizes them by his daring and strength of mind. Secret societies. 4. Meantime, however, until we come into our kingdom, we shall act in the contrary way. We shall create and multiply free Masonic lodges in all the countries of the world, absorb into them all who may become or who are prominent in public activity. For these lodges we shall find our principal intelligence office and means of influence. All these lodges we shall bring under one central administration, known to us alone and to all others absolutely unknown, which will be composed of our learned elders. The lodges will have their representatives who will serve to screen the above-mentioned administration of Masonry and from whom will issue the watchword and program. In these lodges we shall tie together the knot which binds together all revolutionary and liberal elements. Their composition will be made up of all strata of society. The most secret political plots will be known to us and fall under our guiding hands on the very day of their conception. Among the members of these lodges will be almost all the agents of international and national police, since their service is for us irreplaceable in the respect that the police is in a position not only to use its own particular measures with the insubordinate, but also to screen our activities and provide pretexts for discontents, etc. 5. The class of people who most willingly enter into secret societies are those who live by their wits, careerists, and in general people, mostly light-minded, with whom we shall have no difficulty in dealing and in using to wind up the mechanism of the machine devised by us. If this world grows agitated, the meaning of that will be that we have had to stir up in order to break up its too great solidarity. But if there should arise in its midst a plot, then at the head of that plot will be no other than one of our most trusted servants. It is natural that we and no other should lead Masonic activities, for we know whither we are leading, we know the final goal of every form of activity, whereas the Goyim have knowledge of nothing, not even of the immediate effect of action. They put before themselves, usually, the momentary reckoning of the satisfaction of their self-opinion in the accomplishment of their thought, without even remarking that the very conception never belonged to their initiative but to our instigation of their thought. Gentiles are stupid. 6. The Goyim enter the lodges out of curiosity or in the hope by their means to get a nibble at the public pie, and some of them in order to obtain a hearing before the public for their impracticable and groundless fantasies. They thirst for the emotion of success and applause, of which we are remarkably generous. And the reason why we give them this success is to make use of the nigh conceit of themselves to which it gives birth, for that insensibly disposes them to assimilate our suggestions without being on their guard against them, in the fullness of their confidence that it is their own infallibility which is giving utterance to their own thoughts, and that it is impossible for them to borrow those of others.
The assertion of the KKK has infiltrated the United States government systemically through systematic racism, which has historically happened, such as the overthrow of the black elected, I believe it was North Carolina or South Carolina, which system proves terrorism against centralized American law powers. The assertion of power over the rule of law is the mechanism normalized to these terrorist systems, subcontracted for the express purpose of their manipulation of frauds in favor of crime against the systems of order and justice and competence, for the profits are to be stolen and extorted to the centralized few, violent, minority, aggressive, loud, violent, terrorist confederates.
Cannot imagine to what extent the wisest of the Goyim can be brought to a state of unconscious naivete in the presence of this condition of high conceit of themselves, and at the same time how easy it is to take the heart out of them by the slightest ill success, though it be nothing more than the stoppage of the applause they had, and to reduce them to a slavish submission for the sake of winning a renewal of success. By so much as ours disregard success if only they can carry through their plans, by so much the Goyim are willing to sacrifice any plans only to have success. This psychology of theirs materially facilitates for us the 10. These tigers in appearance have the souls of sheep, and the wind blows freely through their heads. We have set them on the hobby horse of an idea about the absorption of individuality by the symbolic unit of collectivism. They have never yet, and they never will have the sense to reflect that this hobby horse is a manifest violation of the most important law of nature, which has established from the very creation of the world one unit unlike another, and precisely for the purpose of instituting individuality. 7. If we have been able to bring them to such a pitch of stupid blindness, is it not a proof, and an amazingly clear proof, of the degree to which the mind of the Goyim is undeveloped in comparison with our mind? This it is, mainly, which guarantees our success. Gentiles are cattle. 8. And how far-seeing were our learned elders in ancient times when they said that to attain a serious end it behooves not to stop at any means or to count the victims sacrificed for the sake of that end. We have not counted the victims of the seed of the Goy cattle, though we have sacrificed many of our own,
Jews.
but for that we have now already given them such a position on the earth as they could not even have dreamed of. The comparatively small numbers of the victims from the number of ours have preserved our nationality from destruction. 9.
Insurance
Death
fraud.
is the inevitable end for all. It is better to bring that end nearer to those who hinder our affairs than to ourselves, to the founders of this affair. We execute Masons in such wise that none save the Brotherhood can ever have a suspicion of it, not even the victims themselves of our death sentence. They all die when required as if from a normal kind of illness. Knowing this,
Heart
even the
attack
Brotherhood
guns
in its turn dare
from the
not
CIA,
protest. By such
from the church
methods we
committee.
have plucked out of the midst of Masonry the very root of protest against our disposition. While preaching liberalism to the Goy, we at the same time keep our own people and our agents in a state of unquestioningly submission. 10. Under our influence, the execution of the laws of the Goyim has been reduced to a minimum. The prestige of the law has been exploded by the liberal interpretations introduced into this sphere. In the most important and fundamental affairs and questions, judges decide as we dictate to them, see matters in the light wherewith we unfold them for the administration of the Goyim, of course, through persons who are our tools, though we do not appear to have anything in common with them, by newspaper opinion or by other means. Even senators
Nazi
and the higher
alliances,
administration accept our counsels.
Jew haters,
The purely brute mind of
anti-Semites,
the Goyim is incapable of use for analysis and observation, and still more for the foreseeing whither a certain manner of setting a question may tend. 11. In this difference in capacity for thought between the Goyim and ourselves may be clearly discerned the seal of our position as the chosen people and of our higher quality of humanness, in contradistinction to the brute mind of the Goyim. Their eyes are open, but see nothing before them and do not invent, unless perhaps, material things. From this it is plain that nature herself has destined us to guide and rule the world. We demand submission. 12. When comes the time of our overt rule, the time to manifest its blessing, we shall remake all legislatures, all our laws will be brief, plain, stable, without any kind of interpretations, so that anyone will be in a position to know them perfectly. The main feature which will run right through them is submission to orders, and this principle will be carried to a grandiose height. Every abuse will then disappear in consequence of the responsibility of all down to the lowest unit before the higher authority of the representative of power. Abuses of power subordinate to this last instance will be so mercilessly punished that none will be found anxious to try experiments with their own powers. We shall follow up jealously every action of the administration on which depends the smooth running of the machinery of the state, for slackness in this produces slackness everywhere. Not a single case of illegality or abuse of power will be left without exemplary punishment. 13. Concealment of guilt, connivance between those in the service of the administration, all this kind of evil will disappear after the very first examples of severe punishment. The aureole of our power demands suitable, that is cruel, punishments for the slightest infringement, for the sake of gain, of its supreme prestige. The sufferer, though his punishment may exceed his fault, will count as a soldier falling on the administrative field of battle in the interest of authority, principle and law, which do not permit that any of those who hold the reins of the public coach should turn aside from the public highway to their own private paths. For examples, our judges will know that whenever they feel disposed to plume themselves on foolish clemency, they are violating the law of justice which is instituted for the exemplary edification of men by penalties for lapses and not for display of the spiritual qualities of the judges. Such qualities it is proper to show in private life, but not in a public square, which is the educationally basis of human life. 14. Our legal staff will serve not beyond the age of 55, firstly because old men more obstinately hold to prejudiced opinions, and are less capable of submitting to new directions, and secondly because this will give us the possibility by this measure of securing elasticity in the changing of staff, which will thus the more easily bend under our pressure. He who wishes to keep his place will have to give blind obedience to deserve it. In general, our judges will be elected by us only from among those who thoroughly understand that the part they have to play is to punish and apply laws and not to dream about the manifestations of liberalism at the expense of the educational scheme of the state, as the Goyim in these days imagine it to be. This method of shuffling the staff will serve also to explode any collective solidarity of those in the same service and will bind all to the interests of the government upon which their fate will depend. The young generation of judges will be trained in certain views regarding the inadmissibility of any abuses that might disturb the established order of our subjects among themselves.
Unitary executive
15.
theory.
In these days the judges of the Goyim create indulgences to every kind of crimes, not having a just understanding of their office, because the rulers of the present age in appointing judges to office take no care to inculcate in them a sense of duty and consciousness of the matter which is demanded of them. As a brute beast lets out its young in search of prey, so do the Goyim give to them for what purpose such place was created. This is the reason why their governments are being ruined by their own forces through the acts of their own administration. 16. Let us borrow from the example of the results of these actions yet another lesson for our government. 17. We shall root out liberalism from all the important strategic posts of our government on which depends the training of subordinates for our state structure. Such posts will fall exclusively to those who have been trained by us for administrative rule. To the possible objection that the retirement of old servants will cost the Treasury heavily, I reply, firstly, they will be provided with some private service in place of what they lose, and, secondly, I have to remark that all the money in the world will be concentrated in our hands, consequently it is not our government that has to fear expense.
They're
We
collapsing
shall
the
be
market,
cruel. 18.
including
Our
Social
absolutism will
Security
in all
and the other
things be
federal social
logically
programs.
consecutive, and therefore in each one of its decrees our supreme will be respected and unquestionably fulfilled. It will ignore all murmurs, all discontents of every kind, and will destroy to the root every kind of manifestation of them in act by punishment of an exemplary character. 19. We shall abolish the right of cessation, which will be transferred exclusively to our disposal, to the cognizance of him who rules, for we must not allow the conception among the people of a thought that there could be such a thing as a decision that is not right of judges set up by us. If, however, anything like this should occur, we shall ourselves cassate the decision, but inflict therewith such exemplary punishment on the judge for lack of understanding of his duty and the purpose of his appointment as will prevent a repetition of such cases. I repeat that it must be borne in mind that we shall know every step of our administration, which only needs to be closely watched for the people to be content with us, for it has the right to demand from a good government a good official. 20. Our government will have the appearance of a patriarchal paternal guardianship on the part of our ruler. Our own nation and our subjects will discern in his person a father caring for their every need, their every act, their every interrelation as subjects one with another, as well as their relations to the ruler. They will then be so thoroughly imbued with the thought that it is impossible for them to dispense with this wardship and guidance, if they wish to live in
Plato's
peace and
conspiracy
quiet, that they will
is
acknowledge the
very powerful.
autocracy of our ruler with a devotion bordering on apotheosis, especially when they are
These
convinced that
Confederates
those whom we set up do
losing
not put their
terrorism,
own in place of authority, but only blindly
subversion of
execute his
social
dictates.
engagements,
They will be rejoiced that we have regulated everything in their lives as is done by wise parents who desire to train children in the cause of
with
duty
all
and
of the
submission.
rights.
For the peoples of the world in regard to the secrets of our polity are ever through the ages only children under age, precisely as are
All
also their
owners
governments.
destroyed.
21. As you see, I found our despotism on right and duty, the right to compel the execution of duty as the direct obligation of a government which is a father for its subjects. It has the right of the strong that it may use it for the benefit of directing humanity towards that order which is defined by nature, namely, submission. Everything in the world is in a state of submission, if not to man, then to circumstances or its own inner character, in all cases, to what is stronger. And so shall we be this something stronger for the sake of good. 22. We are obliged without hesitation to sacrifice individuals who commit a breach of established order, for in the exemplary punishment of evil lies a great educational problem. 23. When the King of Israel sets upon his sacred head the crown offered him by Europe, he will become patriarch of the world. The indispensable victims offered by him in consequence of their suitability will never reach the number of victims offered in the course of centuries by the mania of magnificence, the emulation between the Goy governments. 24. Our king will be in constant communion with the peoples, making to them from the tribune speeches which fame will in that same hour distribute over all the world. Protocol No. 16. 1. In order to effect the destruction of all collective forces except ours, we shall emasculate the first stage of collectivism, the universities, by re-educating them in a new direction. Their officials and professors will be
Wokeness is
prepared for their
cancer.
business by detailed secret programs of action from which they will not with immunity diverge, not by one iota. They will be appointed with a special precaution, and will be so placed as to be wholly dependent upon the government. 2. We shall exclude from the course of instruction state law as also all that concerns the political question. These subjects will be taught to a few dozen of persons chosen for their preeminent capacities from among the number of the initiated. The universities must no longer send out from their halls milksops concocting plans for a constitution, like a comedy or a tragedy, busying themselves with questions of policy in which even their own fathers never had any power of thought. 3. The ill-guided acquaintance of a large number of persons with questions of polity creates utopian dreamers and bad subjects, as you can see for yourselves from the example of the universal education in this direction of the Goyim. We must introduce into their education all those principles which have so brilliantly broken up their order. But when we are in power we shall remove every kind of disturbing subject from the course of education and shall make out of the youth obedient children of authority, loving him who rules as the support and hope of peace and quiet. We shall change history. 4. Classicism is also any form of study of ancient history, in which there are more bad than good examples, we shall replace with the study of the program of the future. We shall erase from the memory of men all facts of previous centuries which are undesirable to us, and leave only those which depict all the errors of the government of the Goyim. The study of practical life, of the obligations of order, of the relations of people one to another, of avoiding bad and selfish examples, which spread the infection of evil, and similar questions of an educative nature, will stand in the forefront of the teaching program, which will be drawn up on a separate plan for each calling or state of life, in no wise generalizing the teaching. This treatment of the question has special importance. 5. Each state of life must be trained within strict limits corresponding to its destination and work in life. The occasional genius has always managed and always will manage to slip through into other states of life, but it is the most perfect folly for the sake of this rare occasional genius to let through into ranks foreign to them the untalented who thus rob of their places who belong to those ranks by birth or employment. You know yourselves in what all this has ended for the Goyim who allowed this crying absurdity. 6. In order that he who rules may be seated firmly in the hearts and minds of his subjects, it is necessary for the time of his activity to instruct the whole nation in the schools and on the marketplaces about this meaning and his acts and all his beneficent initiatives. 7. We shall abolish every kind of freedom of instruction. Learners of all ages have the right to assemble together with their parents in the educational establishments as it were in a club. During these assemblies, on holidays, teachers will read what will pass as free lectures on questions of human relations, of the laws of examples, of the philosophy of new theories not yet declared to the world. These theories will be raised by us to the stage of a dogma of faith as a traditional stage towards our faith. On the completion of this exposition of our program of action in the present and the future, I will read you the principles of these theories. 8. In a word, knowing by the experience of many centuries that people live and are guided by ideas, that these ideas are imbibed by people only by the aid of education provided with equal success for all ages of growth, but of course by varying methods, we shall swallow up and confiscate to our own use the last scintilla of independence of thought, which we have for long past been directing towards subjects and ideas useful for us. The system of bridling thought is already at work in the so-called system of teaching by object lessons, the purpose of which is to turn the Goyim into unthinking submissive brutes waiting for things to be presented before their eyes in order to form an idea of them. In France, one of our best agents, Bourgeois, has already made public a new program of teaching by object lessons. Protocol No. 17. 1. The practice of advocacy produces men cold, cruel, persistent, unprincipled, who in all cases take up an impersonal, purely legal standpoint. They have the inveterate habit to refer everything to its value for the defense and not to the public welfare of its results. They do not usually decline to undertake any defense whatever, they strive for an acquittal at all costs, cavilling over every petty crux of jurisprudence, and thereby they demoralize justice. For this reason we shall set this profession into narrow frames which will keep it inside this sphere of executive public service. Advocates, equally with judges, will be deprived of the right of communication with litigant. They will receive business only from the court and will study it by
Lindsey
notes of
Graham's
report and documents,
war
defending
against
their
civilians
clients after they have been
without due
interrogated
process
in court on facts that
in
have
violation
appeared.
of the Constitution.
They will receive an honorarium without regard to the quality of the defense.
They will not
This will
receive
render them
defense
mere
attorneys
reporters on law business in the
in
interests of
military
justice
court
and as counterpoise
for
to the
civilians
proctor who will be the reporter in
guilty
the
of
interests
nothing,
of prosecution.
being
This will shorten
slandered,
business before the courts.
so they could be
In
destroyed
this way
without
will be
cause.
established a practice of honest, unprejudiced defense conducted not from personal interest but by conviction. This will also, by the way, remove the present practice of corrupt bargain between advocation to agree only to let that side win which pays most. We shall destroy the clergy. 2. We have long past taken care to discredit the priesthood of Goyim, and thereby to ruin their mission on earth, which in these days might still be a great hindrance to us. Day by day its influence on the peoples of the world is falling lower. Freedom of conscience has been declared everywhere, so that now only years divide us from the moment of the complete wrecking of that Christian religion. As to other religions, we shall have still less difficulty in dealing with them, but it would be premature to speak of this now. We shall act clericalism and clericals into such
David's
narrow
character
frames as
as a
to make their
pastor
influence move
is
in
attacked
retrogressive
in
proportion
the
to
study
its
of
former
religion
progress.
to prevent
3.
him from forming
When the
a
time comes
denomination
finally to destroy the papal court,
in
the
order
finger
to
of an
keep him
invisible hand will point the nations
from
towards
being
this
approved
court.
of in the public eye.
When, however, the nations fling themselves upon it, we shall come
the
forward in the
superior,
guise of its defenders
charismatic,
as if to save
moral
excessive bloodshed.
superior
By this
in the
diversion
political
we
debate.
shall penetrate to its very bowels and be sure we shall never come out again until we have
Sabotage
gnawed
of
through the
reputation,
entire strength of this place.
censorship and
4.
editing,
The King of the Jews will be
by
the real
violent
Pope of the
obstructions and
universe, the
terrorism.
Patriarch of the International Church, the Antichrist. 5. But in the meantime, while we are re-educating youth in new traditional religions and afterwards in ours, we shall not overtly lay a finger on existing churches, but we shall fight against them by criticism calculated to produce schism. 6. In general, then, our contemporary press will continue to convict state affairs, religions, incapacities of the Goyim, always using the most unprincipled expressions in order by every means to lower their prestige in the manner which can only be practiced by the genius of our gifted tribe. 7. Our kingdom will be an apologia of the divinity Vishnu, in whom is found its personification. In our 100 hands will be, one in each, the springs of the machinery of social life. We shall see everything without the aid of official police, which, in that scope of its rights which we elaborated for the use of the Goyim, hinders governments from seeing. In our programs 1/3 of our subjects will keep the rest under observation from a sense of duty, on the principle of volunteer service to the state. It will then be no disgrace to be a spy and informer, but a merit. Unfounded denunciations, however, will be cruelly punished that there may be development of abuses of this right. 8. Our agents will be taken from the higher as well as the lower ranks of society, from among the administrative class who spend their time in amusements, editors, printers and publishers, booksellers, clerks, and salesmen, workmen, coachmen, lackeys, etc. This body, having no rights and not being empowered to take any action on their own account, and consequently a police without any power, will only witness and report. Verification of their reports and arrests will depend upon a responsible group of controllers of police affairs, while the actual act of arrest will be performed by the gendarmerie and the municipal police. Any person not denouncing anything seen or heard concerning questions of polity will also be charged with and made responsible for concealment, if it be proved that he is guilty of this crime. 9. Just as nowadays our brethren are obliged at their own risk to denounce to the cabal apostates of their own family or members who have been noticed doing anything in opposition to the cabal, so in our kingdom over all the world it will be obligatory for all our subjects to observe the duty of service to the state in this direction. 10. Such an organization will extirpate abuses of authority, of force, of bribery, everything in fact which we by our counsels, by out theories of the superhuman rights of man, have introduced into the customs of the Goyim. But how else were we to procure that increase of causes predisposing to disorders in the midst of their administration? Among the number of those methods, one of the most important as agents for the restoration of order, so placed as to have the opportunity in their disintegrating activity of developing and displaying their evil inclinations, obstinate self-conceit, irresponsible exercise of authority, and, first and foremost, venality. Protocol No. 18. 1. When it becomes necessary for us to strengthen the strict measures of secret defense, the most fatal poison for the prestige of authority, we shall arrange a simulation of disorders or some manifestation of discontents finding expression through the cooperation of good speakers. Round these speakers will assemble all who are sympathetic to his utterances. This will give us the pretext for domiciliary prerequisitions and surveillance on the part of our servants from among the number of the Goyim police. 2. As the majority of conspirators act of love for the game, for the sake of talking, so, until they commit some overt act, we shall not lay a finger on them but only introduce into their midst observation elements. It must be remembered that the prestige of authority is lessened if it frequently discovers conspiracies against itself. This implies a presumption of consciousness of weakness, or, what is still worse, of injustice. You are aware that we have broken the prestige of the Goy kings by frequent attempts upon their lives through our agents, blind sheep of our flock, who are easily moved by a few liberal phrases to crimes provided only they be painted in political colors. We have compelled the rulers to acknowledge their weakness in advertising overt measures of secret defense, and thereby we shall bring the promise of authority to destruction. 3. Our ruler will be secretly protected only by the most insignificant guard, because we shall not admit so much as a thought that there could exist against him any sedition with which he is not strong enough to contend and is compelled to hide from it. 4. If we should admit this thought, as the Goyim have done and are doing, we should ipso facto be signing a death sentence, if not for our ruler, at any rate for his dynasty, at no distant date. Government by fear. 5. According to strictly enforced outward appearances, our ruler will employ his power only for the advantage of the nation and in no wise for his own or dynastic profits. Therefore, with the observance of this decorum, his authority will be respected and guarded by the subjects themselves. It will receive an apotheosis in the admission that with it is bound up the well-being of every citizen of the state, for upon it will depend all order in the common life of the pack. 6. Overt defense of the kind argues weakness in the organization of his strength. 7. Our ruler will always be among the people and be surrounded by a mob of apparently curious men and women, who will occupy the front ranks about him, to all appearance by chance, and will restrain the ranks of the rest out of respect as it will appear for good order. This will sow an example of restraint also in others. If a petitioner appears among the people trying to hand a petition and forcing his way through the ranks, the first ranks must receive the petition and before the eyes of the petitioner pass it to the ruler, so that all may know that what is handed in reaches its destination, that consequently there exists a control of the ruler himself. The aureole of power requires for its existence that the people may be able to say, if the king knew of this, or, the king will hear it. 8. With the establishment of official defense, the mystical prestige of authority disappears, given a certain audacity, and everyone counts himself master of it. The sedition-monger is conscious of his strength, and when occasion serves watches for the moment to make an attempt upon authority. For the Goyim we have been preaching something else, but by that very fact we are enabled to see what measures of overt defense have brought them to. 9. Criminals with U.S. will be arrested at the first, more or less, well-grounded suspicion. It cannot be allowed that out of fear of a possible mistake an opportunity should be given of escape to persons suspected of a political lapse of crime, for in these matters we shall be literally merciless. If it is still possible, by stretching a point, to admit a reconsideration of the motive causes in simple crimes, there is no possibility of excuse for persons occupying themselves with questions in which nobody except the government can understand anything. And it is not all governments that understand true policy. Protocol No. 19. 1. If we do not permit any independent dabbling in the political, we shall, on the other hand, encourage every kind of report or petition with proposals for the government to examine into all kinds of projects for the amelioration of the condition of the people. This will reveal to us the defects or else the fantasies of our subjects, to which we shall respond either by accomplishing them or by a wise rebutment to prove the short-sightedness of one who judges wrongly. 2. Sedition-mongering is nothing more than the yapping of a lap dog at an elephant. For a government well organized, not from the police but from the public point of view, the lap dog yaps at the elephant in entire unconsciousness of its strength and importance. It needs no more than to take a good example to show the relative importance of both, and the lap dogs will cease to yap and will wag their tails the moment they set eyes on an elephant. 3. In order to destroy the prestige of heroism for political crime, we shall send it for trial in the category of thieving, murder, and every kind of abominable and filthy crime. Public opinion will then confuse in its conception of this category of crime with the disgrace attaching to every other and will brand it with the same contempt. 4. We have done our best, and I hope we have succeeded to obtain that the Goyim should not arrive at this means of contending with sedition. It was for this reason that through the press and in speeches, indirectly, in cleverly compiled school books on history, we have advertised the martyrdom alleged to have been accredited by sedition-mongers for the idea of the Commonwealth. This advertisement has increased the contingent of liberals and has brought thousands of Goyim into the ranks of our livestock cattle.
Do not protect their life
Protocol
without
No.
cause
20.
for any
1.
reason.
Today we
to
shall
dispel
touch
voting,
upon the financial program, which I
to
put
attack
off
the
to the end of
Republic,
my report as being the most difficult,
to
the
bend
crowning
it,
and the decisive point of our
and
plans.
gag it.
Before entering upon it, I will remind you that I have already spoken before by way of a hint when I said that the sum total of our actions is settled by the question of figures. 2. When we come into our kingdom, our autocratic government will avoid, from a principle of self-preservation, sensibly burdening the masses of the people with taxes, remembering that it plays the part of father and protector. But as state organization costs dear, it is necessary nevertheless to obtain the funds required for it. It will, therefore, elaborate with particular precaution the question of equilibrium in this matter. 3. Our rule, in which the king will enjoy the legal fiction that everything in his state belongs to him, which may easily be translated into fact, will be enabled to
Unitary
resort to the
theory.
lawful confiscation of all sums of every kind for the regulation of their circulation in the
Arbitrary
state.
war
From this follows that
against
taxation will
civilians
best be covered by a progressive
from
tax on
fraud.
property. In this manner the dues will be paid without straitening or ruining anybody in the form of a percentage of the amount of property. The rich must be aware that it is their duty to place a part of their
By
superfluities at the
subversive
disposal of the state, since the state guarantees them
to overthrow
security of
justice,
possession of the rest of their property and the right of honest gains.
to
I say
crumble
honest,
the
for
rule
the
of
control
law,
over property will do away with robbery on
by
a
the
legal
rule
basis.
of laws,
4. This social reform must come from above, for the time is ripe for it. It is indispensable as a pledge of peace. We shall destroy capital. 5. The tax upon the poor man is a seed of revolution and works to the detriment of the state, which is hunting after the trifling is missing the big. Quite apart from this, a tax on capitalists diminishes the growth of wealth in private hands, in which we have in these days concentrated it as a counterpoise to the government strength of the Goyim, their state finances. 6. A tax
Capitalism
increasing in a percentage
presented
ratio to
from
capital will give much
communist
larger
plans
revenue than the present individual or
dismantle
property tax,
capitalism
which is useful to us now for the sole reason that it excites
fraud
trouble and
and false
discontent among
accusation.
the Goyim. 7. The force upon which our king will rest consists in the equilibrium and the guarantee of peace, for the sake of which things it is indispensable that the capitalists should yield up a portion of their incomes for the sake of the secure working of the machinery of the state. State needs must be paid by those who will not feel the burden and have enough to take from. 8. Such a measure will destroy the hatred of the poor man for the rich, in whom he will see a necessary financial support for the state, will see in him the organizer of peace and well-being, since he will see that it is the rich man who is paying the necessary means to attain these things. 9. In order that payers of the educated classes should not too much distress themselves over the new payments, they will have full accounts given them of the destination of those payments, with the exception of such sums as will be appropriated for the needs of the throne and the administrative institutions. 10. He who reigns will not have any properties of his own once all in the state represented his patrimony, or else the one would be in contradiction to the other. The fact of holding private means would destroy the right of property in the common possessions of all. 11. Relatives of him who reigns, his heirs excepted, who will be maintained by the resources of the state, must enter the ranks of servants of the state or must work to obtain the right to property. The privilege of royal blood must not serve for the spoiling of the treasury. 12. Purchase, receipt of money or inheritance will be subject to the payment of a stamp progressive tax. Any transfer of property, whether money or other, without evidence of payment of this tax, which will be strictly registered by names, will render the former holder liable to pay interest on the tax from the moment of transfer of these sums up to the discovery of his evasion of declaration of the transfer. Transfer documents must be presented weekly at the local treasury office with notifications of the name, surname and permanent place of residence of the former and the new holder of the property. This transfer with register of names must begin from a definite sum which exceeds the ordinary expenses of buying and selling necessaries, and these will be subject to payment only by a stamp impost of a definite percentage of the unit. 13. Just strike an estimate of how many times such taxes as these will cover the revenue of the Goyim states. We cause depressions. 14. The state exchequer will have to maintain a definite complement of reserve sums, and all that is collected above that complement must be returned into circulation. On these sums will be organized public works. The initiative in works of this kind, proceeding from state sources, will blind the working class firmly to the interests of the state and to those who reign. From these same sums also a part will be set aside as rewards of inventiveness and productiveness. 15. On no account should so much as a single unit above the definite and freely estimated sums be retained in the state treasuries, for money exists to be circulated and any kind of stagnation of money acts ruinously on the running of the state machinery, for which it is the lubricant. A stagnation of the lubricant may stop the regular working of the mechanism. 16. The substitution of interest-bearing paper for a part of the token of exchange has produced exactly this stagnation. The consequences of this circumstance are already sufficiently noticeable. 17. A court of account will also be instituted by us, and in it the ruler will find at any moment a full accounting for state income and expenditure, with the exception of the current monthly account, not yet made up, and that of the preceding month, which will not yet have been delivered. 18. The one and only person who will have no interest in robbing the state is its owner, the ruler. This is why his personal control will remove the possibility of leakages of extravagances. 19. The representative function of the ruler at receptions for the sake of etiquette, which absorbs so much invaluable time, will be abolished in order that the ruler may have time for control and consideration. His power will not then be split up into fractional parts among time-serving favorites who surround the throne for its pomp and splendor, and are interested only in their own and not in the common interests of the state. 20. Economic crises have been produced by us for the Goyim by no other means than the withdrawal of money from circulation. Huge capitals have stagnated, withdrawing money from states, which were constantly obliged to apply to those same stagnant capitals for loans. These loans burdened the finances of the state with the payment of interest and made them the bond slaves of these capitals. The concentration of industry in the hands of capitalists out of the hands of small masters has drained away all the juices of the peoples and with them also the states. 21. The present issue of money in general does not correspond with the requirements per head, and cannot therefore satisfy all the needs of the workers. The issue of money ought to correspond with the growth of population, and thereby children also must absolutely be reckoned as consumers of currency from the day of their birth. The revision of issue is a material question for the whole world. 22. You are aware that the gold standard has been the ruin of the states which adopted it, for it has not been able to satisfy the demands for money, the more so that we have removed gold from circulation as far as possible. Gentile states bankrupt. 23. With us the standard that must be introduced is the cost of working manpower, whether it be reckoned in paper or in wood. We shall make the issue of money in accordance with the normal requirements of each subject, adding to the quantity with every birth and subtracting with every death. 24. The accounts will be managed by each department, the French administrative division, each circle. 25. In order that there may be no delays in the paying of money for state needs, the sums and terms of such payments will be fixed by decree of the ruler. This will do away with the protection by a ministry of one institution to the detriment of others. 26. The budgets of income and expenditure will be carried out side by side that they may not be obscured by distance one to another. 27. The reforms projected by us in the financial institutions and principles of the Goyim will be clothed by us in such forms as will alarm nobody. We shall point out the necessity of reforms in consequence of the disorderly darkness into which the Goyim by their irregularities have plunged the finances. The first irregularity, as we shall point out, consists in their beginning with drawing up a single budget which year after year grows owing to the following cause: this budget is dragged out to half the year, then they demand a budget to put things right, and this they expend in 3 months, after which they ask for a supplementary budget, and all this ends with a liquidation budget. But as the budget of the following year is drawn up in accordance with the sum of the total addition, the annual departure from the normal reaches as much as 50% in a year, and so the annual budget is trebled in 10 years. Thanks to such methods, allowed by the carelessness of the Goy states, their treasuries are empty. The period of loans supervenes, and that has swallowed up remainders and brought all the Goy states to bankruptcy. 28. You understand perfectly that economic arrangements of this kind, which have been suggested to the Goyim by us, cannot be carried on by us. 29. Every kind of loan proves infirmity in the state and a want of understanding of the rights of the state. Loans hang like a sword of Damocles over the heads of rulers, who, instead of taking from their subjects by a temporary tax, come begging with outstretched palm of our bankers. Foreign loans are leeches which there is no possibility of removing from the body of the state until they fall off of themselves or the state flings them off. But the Goy states do not tear them off, they go on in persisting in putting more onto themselves so that they must inevitably perish, drained by voluntary bloodletting. Tyranny of usury. 30. What also indeed is, in substance, a loan, especially a foreign loan. A loan is an issue of government bills of exchange containing a percentage obligation commensurate to the sum of the loan capital. If the loan bears a charge of 5%, then in 20 years the state vainly pays away in interest a sum equal to the loan borrowed. In 40 years it is paying a double sum, in 60, treble, and all the while the debt remains an unpaid debt. 31. From this calculation it is obvious that with any form of taxation per head the state is bailing out the last coppers of the poor taxpayers in order to settle accounts with wealth foreigners, from whom it has borrowed money instead of collecting these coppers for its own needs without the additional interest. 32. So long as loans were internal, the Goyim only shuffled their money from the pockets of the poor to those of the rich, but when we bought up the necessary person in order to transfer loans into the external sphere, all the wealth of states flowed into our cash boxes and all the Goyim began to pay us the tribute of subjects.
The original frauds.
33. If the superficiality of Goy kings on their thrones in regard to state affairs and the venality of ministers or the want of understanding of financial matters on the part of other ruling persons have made their country's debtors to our treasuries to amounts quite impossible to pay, it has not been accomplished without, on our part, heavy expenditure of trouble and money. 34. Stagnation of money will not be allowed by us, and therefore there will be no state interest-bearing paper, except a 1% series, so that there will be no payment of interest to leeches that suck all the strength out of the state. The right to issue interest-bearing paper will be given exclusively to industrial companies who will find no difficulty in paying interest out of profits, whereas the state does not make interest on borrowed money like these companies, for the state borrows to spend and not to use in operations. 35. Industrial papers will be bought also by the government, which from being as now a paper of tribute by loan operations will be transformed into a lender of money at a profit. This measure will stop the stagnation of money, parasitic profits and idleness, all of which were useful for us among the Goyim so long as they were independent but are not desirable under our rule. 36. How clear is the undeveloped power of thought of the purely brute brains of the Goyim, as expressed in the fact that they have been borrowing from us with payment of interest without ever thinking that all the same these very monies plus an addition for payment of interest must be got by them from their own state pockets in order to settle up with us. What could have been simpler than to take the money they wanted from their own people? 37. But it is a proof of the genius of our chosen mind that we have contrived to present the matter of loans to them in such a light that they have even seen in them an advantage for themselves. 38. Our accounts, which we shall present when the time comes, in the light of centuries of experience gained by experiments made by us on the Goy states, will be distinguished by clearness and definiteness and will show at a glance to all men the advantage of our innovations. They will put an end to those abuses to which we owe our mastery over the Goyim, but which cannot be allowed in our kingdom. 39. We shall so hedge about our
Not limited
system of accounting that
to
neither
its
the ruler
destruction
nor
of
the
its
most
direct
insignificant
peoples
public
by
servant
violence.
will be in a position to divert even the smallest sum from its destination without detection or to direct it in another direction except that
Such
which
as
will be
the
once
false
fixed in a
experiments by the
definite plan of
Nazis, or the
action.
false experiments by the
40.
Japanese,
And without a definite
who instead
plan
of
it
being
is
punished for
impossible
their
to
war
rule.
crimes,
Marching
were
along an
ingested,
undetermined road and with
having not
undetermined
conducted
resources
real
brings to
experiments
ruin by the way
that could
heroes
be
and demigods.
determined as to find real
41. The
viable
Goy rulers,
results,
whom we once upon a time advised should be
supported for
distracted
the
from
function
state occupations
of the
by
normalized
representative
structure
receptions, observances of etiquette,
abuse as
entertainments,
a
were only
criminal
screens
black
for our
market,
rule. The accounts of favorite
profiting
courtiers
the
who replaced them
acceleration
in the sphere of affairs were drawn up for them by our
of the
agents, and
wizards.
every time gave satisfaction to short-sighted minds by promises that in the future economics and improvements were foreseen. Economics from what? From new taxes? Were questions that might have been but were not asked by those who read our accounts and projects. 42. You know to what they have been brought by this carelessness, to what pitch of financial disorder they have arrived, notwithstanding the astonishing industry of their peoples. Protocol No. 21. 1. To what I reported to you at the last meeting I shall now add a detailed explanation of internal loans. Of foreign loans I shall say nothing more, because they have fed us with national moneys of the Goyim, but for our state there will be no foreigners, that is, nothing external. 2. We have taken advantage of the venality of administrators and slackness of rulers to get our money and more times over, by lending to the Goy government's monies which were not at all needed by the states. Could anyone do the like in regard to us? ... Therefore, I shall only deal with the details of internal loans. 3. States announce that such a loan is to be concluded and open subscriptions for their own bills of exchange, that is, for their interest-bearing paper. That they may be within the reach of all the price is determined at from 100 to 1,000, and a discount is made for the earliest subscribers. Next day by artificial means the price of them goes up, the alleged reason being that everyone is rushing to buy them. In a few days the treasury safes are, as they say, overflowing, and there's more money than they can do with. The subscription, it is alleged, covers many times over the issue total of the loan. In this lies the whole stage effect. Look you, they say, what confidence is shown in the government's bills of exchange. 4. But when the comedy is played out there emerges the fact that a debit, and an exceedingly burdensome debit, has been created. For the payment of interest it becomes necessary to have recourse
Surplus
to new
turns
loans,
to debt
which do not swallow up but only add to the capital debt.
over the course of decades.
And when this credit is exhausted it becomes necessary by new taxes to cover, not the loan, but only the interest on it.
Consumed
These
by
taxes are a
Nazi
debit
Confederate
employed to cover a
traitors.
debit. 5. Later comes the time for conversions,
mostly
but they diminish
Nazism,
the payment of
a
interest without covering the debt,
communism,
and besides they cannot be made without the
mirroring
consent of the lenders. On
China's
announcing a conversion, a
mostly
proposal is
communist,
made to return
a
the
little
money to those
fascist
who are not
system
willing to convert their paper.
in partnership
If everybody expressed his
to the
unwillingness
system
and demanded his money back, the government would be hooked on their own
generates
files and would be found
an
insolvent and
agreement
unable to pay the
to
proposed
terrorism
sums.
and
By
tyranny
good luck the subjects of the Goy governments, knowing
through the
nothing about
false
financial
sovereignty
affairs, have always preferred losses on exchange and diminution of interest
of
to
the
the risk of
Stuart
new investments
against
of
the
their
sovereign.
monies, and have thereby many a time enabled these governments to throw off their shoulders a debit of several millions. 6. Nowadays, with external loans, these tricks cannot be played by the Goyim, for they know that we shall demand all our monies back. 7. In this way an acknowledged bankruptcy will best prove to the various countries the absence of any means between the interest of the peoples and of those who rule them. 8. I beg you to concentrate your particular attention upon this point and upon the following. Nowadays all internal loans are consolidated by so-called flying loans, that is, such as have terms of payment more or less near. These debts consist of monies paid into the savings banks and reserve funds. If left for long at the disposition of a government, these funds evaporate in the payment of interest on foreign loans, and are placed by the deposit of equivalent amount of rents. 9. And these last it is which patch up all the leaks in the state treasuries of the Goyim. 10. When we ascend the throne of the world, all these financial and similar shifts, as being not in accord with our interests, will be swept away so as not to leave a trace, as also will be destroyed all money markets, since we shall not allow the prestige of our power to be shaken by fluctuations of prices set upon our values, which we shall announce by law at the price which represents their full worth without any possibility of lowering or raising. Raising gives the pretext for lowering, which indeed was where we made a beginning in relation to the values of the goyim. 11. We shall replace the money markets by grandiose government credit institutions, the object of which will be to fix the price of industrial values in accordance with government views. These institutions will be in a position to fling upon the market 500 millions of industrial paper in one day, or to buy up for the same amount. In this way all industrial undertakings will come into dependence upon us. You may imagine for yourselves what immense power we shall thereby secure for ourselves. Protocol No. 22. 1. In all that has so far been reported by me to you, I have endeavored to depict with care the secret of what is coming, of what is past, and of what is going on now, rushing into the flood of the great events coming already in the near future, the secret of our relations to the goyim and of financial operations. On this subject there remains still a little for me to add. 2. In our hands is the greatest power of our day, gold. In 2 days we can procure from our storehouses any quantity we may please. 3. Surely there is no need to seek further proof that our rule is predestined by God? Surely we shall not fail with such wealth to prove that all that evil which for so many centuries we have had to commit has served at the end of ends the cause of true well-being, the bringing of everything into order? Though it be even by the exercise of some violence, yet all the same it will be established. We shall contrive to prove that we are benefactors who have restored to the rent and mangled earth the true good and also freedom of the person, and therewith we shall enable it to be enjoyed in peace and quiet, with proper dignity of relations, on the condition, of course, of strict observance of the laws established by us. We shall make plain therewith that freedom does not consist in dissipation and in the right of unbridled license any more than the dignity and force of a man do not consist in the right of everyone to promulgate destructive principles in the nature of freedom of conscience, equality and alike. That freedom of the person in no wise consists in the right to agitate oneself and others by abominable speeches before disorderly mobs, and that true freedom consists in the inviolability of the person who honorably and strictly observes all the laws of life in common, that human dignity is wrapped up in consciousness of the rights and also of the absence of rights of each, and not wholly and solely in fantastic imaginings about the subject of one's ego. 4. One authority will be glorious because it will be all-powerful, will rule and guide, and not muddle along after leaders and orators shrieking themselves hoarse with senseless words which they call great principles and which are nothing else, to speak honestly, but utopian. Our authority will be the crown of order, and in that is included the whole happiness of man. The aureole of this authority will inspire a mystical bowing of the knee before it and a reverent fear before it of all the peoples. True force makes no terms with any right, not even with that of God. None dare come near to it so as to take so much as a span from it away. Protocol No. 23:1. That the peoples may become accustomed to obedience, it is necessary to inculcate lessons of humility and therefore to reduce the production of articles of luxury. By this we shall improve morals which have been debased by emulation in the sphere of luxury. We shall re-establish small master production, which will mean laying a mine under the private capital of manufactures. This is indispensable also for the reason that manufacturers on the grand scale often move, though not always consciously, the thoughts of the masses in directions against the government. A people of small masters knows nothing of unemployment, and this binds him closely with existing order, and consequently with the firmness of authority. For us its part will have been played out the moment authority is transferred into our hands. Drunkenness also will be prohibited by law and punishable as a crime against humanness of man who is turned into a brute under the influence of alcohol. 2. Subjects, I repeat once more, give blind obedience only to the strong hand which is absolutely independent of them, for in it they feel the sword of defense and support against social scourges. What do they want with an angelic spirit in a king? What they have to see in him is the personification of force and power. 3. The The Supreme Lord who will replace all now existing ruler, dragging in their existence among societies demoralized by us, societies that have denied even the authority of God, from whose midst breads out on all sides the fire of anarchy, must first of all proceed to quench this all-devouring flame. Therefore he will be obliged to kill off those existing societies, though he should drench them with his own blood, that he may resurrect them again in the form of regularly organized troops fighting consciously with every kind of infection that may cover the body of the state with sores. 4. This chosen one of God is chosen from above to demolish the senseless forces moved by instinct and not reason, by brutishness and humanness. These forces now triumph in manifestations of robbery and every kind of violence under the mask of principles of freedom and every kind of violence under the mask of principles of freedom and rights. They have overthrown all forms of social order to erect on the ruins of the throne of the King of the Jews, but their part will be played out the moment he enters into his kingdom. Then it will be necessary to sweep them away from his path, on which must be left no knot, no splinter. 5. Then will it be possible for us to say to the peoples of the world, give thanks to God and bow the knee before him who bears on his front the seal of the predestination of man, to which God himself has led his star that none other but him might free us from all the before-mentioned forces and evils. Protocol No. 24. 1. I pass now to the method of confirming the dynastic roots of King David to the last strata of the earth. 2. This confirmation will first and foremost be included in that which to this day has wrested the force of conservatism by our learned elders of the conduct of the affairs of the world, in the directing of the education of thought of all humanity. 3. Certain members of the seed of David will prepare the kings and their heirs, selecting not by right of heritage but by eminent capacities, inducting them into the most secret mysteries of the political, into schemes of government, but providing always that none may come to knowledge of the secrets. The object of this mode of action is that all may know that government cannot be entrusted to those who have not been inducted into the secret places of its art. 4. To these persons only will be taught the practical application of the aforenamed plans by comparison of the experiences of many centuries, all the observations on the politico-economic moves and social sciences, in a word, all the spirit of laws which have been unshakably established by nature herself for the regulation of the relations of humanity. 5. Direct heirs will often be set aside from ascending the throne if in their time of training they exhibit frivolity, softness and other qualities that are the ruin of authority, which render them incapable of governing and in themselves dangerous for kingly office. 6. Only those who are unconditionally capable for firm, even if it be to cruelty, direct rule will receive the reins of rule from our learned elders. 7. In case of falling sick with weakness of will or other form of incapacity, kings must by law hand over the reins of rule to new and capable hands. 8. The king's plan of action for the current moment, and all the more so for the future, will be unknown even to those who are called his closest counselors. King of the Jews. 9. Only the king and the three who stood sponsor for him will know what is coming. 10. In the person of the king who with unbending will is master of himself and of humanity all will discern as it were fate with its mysterious ways. None will know what the king wishes to attain by his dispositions, and therefore none will dare to stand across an unknown path. 11. It is understood that the brain reservoir of the king must correspond in capacity to the plan of government it has to contain. It is for this reason that he will ascend the throne not otherwise than after examination of his mind by the aforesaid learned elders. 12. That the people may know and love their king, it is indispensable for him to converse in the marketplaces with his people. This ensures the necessary clinching of the two forces which are now divided one from another by us by the terror. 13. This terror was indispensable for us till the time comes for both these forces separately to fall under our influence. 14. The King of the Jews must not be at the mercy of his passions, and especially of sensuality. On no side of his character must he give brute instincts power over his mind. Sensuality worse than all else disorganizes the capacities of the mind and clearness of views, distracting the thoughts to the worst and most brutal side of human activity. 15. The prop of humanity in the person of the Supreme Lord of all the world of the holy seed of David must sacrifice to his people all personal inclinations. 16. Our Supreme Lord must be of an exemplary irreproachable.
Supreme Lord indeed. Protect yourself from their frauds, because...
So here's more of how they discredited people. This came out in some more Twitter files, and they gave it to this guy, Michael Schellenberger. And
this is the
it
Jimmy
sounds
Dore
like a
show.
comedy name. But
U.S. government
he says,
ordered
so
media
he
not
did
to
a whole
report
thread on
Hunter Biden laptop story. Manufacturing the two-tiered
he did a
system,
thread about the Hunter Biden
which
laptop.
is Confederate wizard
So watch
terrorism
this.
against
This is very
American rule
interesting.
of law.
He says efforts continue to
Republic
influence
is
Twitter's
their
Joel
enemy.
Roth. Now we told you who Joel Roth was. He was the guy who was like the head
despotism,
censor guy over at Twitter,
tyranny,
and who is now pretending he's a victim. No. In September 20, I mean, he was ruining people's reputations left and right, and now somehow this guy, who got millions of dollars to ruin people's reputations, who were just telling the truth, while he was leaving child porn on the site, by the way. In September 2020, Roth participated in an Aspen Institute tabletop exercise on a potential hack and dump operation relating to Hunter Biden. The goal was to shape how the media covered it and how social media carried it. So what, Max, tell people what is this Aspen Institute? Tell me what this is and why is this important?
Max Blumenthal.
Well, this is a hugely important dimension of the Twitter files that I chose to highlight because I thought it wasn't getting enough attention,
all of the Twitter
because
files.
it shows that mainstream media editors and journalists actually participated in the plot to censor and suppress news of Hunter Biden's laptop because it was going to damage Joe Biden's election prospects. And it just shows how
Voter
connected
fraud,
the mainstream
removing
media is
necessary
to
information
U.S. intelligence and
change
the
election results.
I mean, you could say the Democratic
and
Party,
policy
and I know
crafting.
people on the right will say this is the left, but it's really the Uniparty.
That's right. Yeah, people make that mistake. Like Elon Musk can't stop doing that.
Confederates
And
are
they equate the
uniform.
Democratic Party with the left. The Democratic Party is Joe Biden is the furthest thing from a lefty. He's been a right-wing maniac his entire goddamn career.
I mean, this is the regime, and there are a lot of Republicans that are a part of it too.
That's right. So you go on to say top corporate media editors and national security hacks were convened at the Aspen Institute and programmed on how to frame disclosures from Hunter Biden's laptop as a Russian hack and dump operation. And they were given instructions on how to be effective anti-Trump Putin info warriors. And so who was there? The organizer was Vivian Schiller, the former CEO of NPR, former head of news at Twitter, former general manager of the New York Times, former chief digital officer of NBC News. Attendees included Meta's Facebook's head of security policy and top national security reporters for the New York Times, Washington Post, and others. So by mid-September, you can't overstate this. Like, this is such a big deal that these people all got together to try to figure out how we're going to cover a story, like in a way that doesn't hurt the establishment. That's what that is, right? How do we have people cover this story in a way that's friendly to the establishment? Right now, the establishment is Joe Biden and his regime, his administration, and the Democrats who control the government, right? That's what this is, right?
And the neocons that came from the George W. Bush Republicans who effectively support and control Biden as well. I mean, what we see here, we see U.S. intelligence and the feds, the mainstream media, the Democratic Party elite, and you could include Bush Republicans, George W. Bush Republicans in that. Those are the four forces that comprise the regime, and then I guess some aspect of the military as well. And in this case, they're holding a secret tabletop exercise, sort of like the kind that was held right ahead of the appearance of COVID-19 by some of these same forces. Johns Hopkins University hosted it along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And here you have the Aspen Institute, which is another kind of neoliberal U.S. government regime cutout that's funded by corporations and billionaires. and they bring in all these journalists, and they game out a scenario. So imagine you're a journalist and you come in and you're participating in this exercise, and the scenario doesn't actually convey the reality of the Hunter Biden laptop, but you begin to believe that it's the reality, because in this scenario, the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian disinformation effort, and various reporters were recruited to disseminate Russian disinformation to the public in order to become unwitting vehicles for Russian meddling and the destabilization of the American political and democratic process. And that's the nightmare scenario for every mainstream reporter and pretty much any reporter right now. So these reporters are brought in and they're like, this is you're playing this part, but you don't want to do that. And therefore, you don't want to give any oxygen to the Hunter Biden laptop, and you have to go out and tell other reporters not to be an unwitting vehicle for the Russian FSB or GRU, whoever wants to destroy our democracy. In reality, the Hunter Biden laptop came out because he brought it to a repair shop, and it was all real, and Russia had nothing to do with it. As we now know, 50 former CIA employees and officials who declared it to the laptop to be textbook Russian disinformation have been totally discredited. They lied, and they were doing their job by lying. So here the mainstream media is participating, and you can look at their guidelines for what they call propaganda reporting and how they're being told how to respond to the laptop. One thing they're supposed to do, careful, slow deliberation, which is code for delay the story for as long as possible.
Slow
because
walk.
This is October 2020, so delay it for another few weeks, and then we're in there, baby. We're in the White House. 4 C's: cooperate, contextualize, control, and curate. Cooperate with who? Cooperate with U.S. intelligence, the FBI. Contextualize, brand it as Russian propaganda. Control, do not let the message out. And curate, you are in control of the message.
You cherry pick the evidence that you're. So that curate means cherry pick, and don't show people evidence that would go counter to our narrative about the Hunter's laptop. Don't
tell them what the contents are.
Yes. And tell them that and any content that does get out, you say it's made up. You say it's Russian disinformation. The idea was that somehow Russians put stuff on the laptop. That's the idea. And then he brought the laptop to a guy. Why would none of that is, again, it's so classic FBI bullshit story. So what's interesting is just how overwhelming. So the FBI had a direct portal to the people at Twitter. So this guy, Chan, right? So he's an FBI guy. And Roth.
Elvis Chan.
And Elvis is his name, right? It's hilarious. And this guy, Roth, who's the head censor guy over at Twitter, they had set up an encrypted messaging network so employees from the FBI and Twitter could communicate. Encrypting. So, and they were going to share top secret information with people at frickin' Twitter. And why was that okay? Because the people at Twitter are FBI. That's why they were okay with it. They also agreed to create a virtual war room for all the internet industry, plus the FBI and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
So they could corner these markets.
Unbelievable. Wired. So you got
Similar
this, and then you this is a
through,
great catch by you. You said Wired, that magazine, which was spawned as a PR
false
vehicle
accusation,
for U.S. intelligence,
for
hyped the
terrorism,
2020. I didn't know that, by the way. I thought Wired was a real
as a
magazine.
Confederate coup.
Actually, in the Real Anthony Fauci, there's a great section about it that's adapted from some reporting Children's Health Defense has done on Wired.
Okay.
I would recommend that to anyone who wants to know the background, but just the really short version is that it was spawned with seed money from Nicholas Negroponte, who is the brother of former Director of National Intelligence John Negroponte, who is also a spook, because they wanted tech reporting to basically hype up the tech that was being spun out by vehicles like the CIA's research and development arm, and they didn't want to support the kind of tech community that someone like Julian Assange represented, that included like people that were into hacking the system. So that's really what Wired is, basically just a bulletin board for the intelligence services in the military. And Noah Shachtman, who was a part of this meeting at the Aspen Institute launched his career at Wired after selling his personal blog to a military contractor, and basically became a propagandist for the military intelligence apparatus. And today he's the editor of Rolling Stone.
Yes,
he presided over that fake ivermectin story about hospitals filling up with ivermectin victims, for example.
Yes. Yeah, I knew who that was. So Wired, the magazine, was spawned as a PR vehicle for the U.S. intelligence. They hyped the 2020 Hunter Biden tabletop exercise. Reporters were given instructions to slow disclosures on the laptop, contextualize as Russian hacking, doubt their veracity, and control the message. So this is what makes... So how could you not be? So if you could think of it, the establishment's doing it. So just like when people were like, hey, is there a cabal of behind-the-scenes people trying to influence the election? And then you see a headline in Time magazine, there was a behind-the-scenes cabal of well-connected people for the establishment to try to control the election. You saw that they did the article themselves. I think it was Crystal Ball's sister who wrote it. They did it themselves. They tell you this. Do you remember that? And so now you see this, and they're having these meetings in Aspen telling people how to... There isn't anything that you can think of, they're doing it. Any nefarious criminal thing you can think of, the CIA already has a plan for it, and they're doing it. So just like everybody was thinking, and you were told you were crazy conspiracy theorists to think the government and big pharma and social media were working together to censor accurate information. Of course they want to censor accurate information. That's why they've always done that. Again, manufacturing consent. The corporate news media isn't there to inform you about what's happening in the world. It's there to put propaganda in your head that the billionaire class wants you to think, so that they can control you. Do you think they could get away with sending $100 billion in your fucking face to the most corrupt country in a goddamn world while people are dying and living under every bridge in this country? You think they could do that without a sophisticated media propaganda machine? They couldn't. That's why they need it, and that's why people like us are a threat, and that's why my Wikipedia page looks like it does. I'm sorry, Max, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, Wikipedia, I mean, when we see the amount of state involvement in Wikipedia, it's
far
going
more
to
viable
be massive.
Based upon its viability.
But what's so remarkable here is that these reporters are not just being told what to say, they're being told what not to report or to not report a major story, and they all comply. And there's no curiosity there. I mean, this is a new level of propaganda. It's propaganda by omission. Just not letting the public know that this major scandal explodes. And so then it only gets reported by the New York Post, this Murdoch tabloid, and so then everyone else can just dismiss that as right-wing, pro-Trump Murdoch propaganda. It's not real. And they succeeded. Well, one person who tried to break through was Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept, and that was the end of him there.
Yes, that's right. He had to leave The Intercept, the publication he founded, because they wouldn't let him tell the truth. They wouldn't let him tell the truth about a real story, as they were doing propaganda for the establishment to try to influence the election. That's what Intercept was doing. They were trying doing what they were saying that Russia was doing. They were actually trying to influence the election. Go ahead, Max. Sorry.
And there's a connection to The Intercept here. I mean, these reporters are basically being cultivated as missionaries to go out to the rest of their media colleagues and tell them not to report on this because this is a hack and dump operation. And you had Claire Wardle at the Aspen Institute tabletop exercise. She is one of the founders of First Draft, which is another Omidyar operation, or Omidyar outfit. Pierre Omidyar, the owner of The Intercept, who is a U.S. intelligence cutout himself. And First Draft focuses on fighting misinformation in media, and here what they're doing is actually encouraging it. And you have someone from that same Intercept network that would not allow Glenn Greenwald to get this story through participating in this exercise.
Amazing. I like this tweet. As I revealed, Washington Post national security correspondent, I don't know who that is. How do you say that name?
Ellen Nakashima.
Had her devices hacked by the CIA operatives when she visited Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. She knew the FBI opened her phone, but never reported on what should be a Titanic scandal. So
Yeah.
that's just more evidence of the in-bedness that the reporters, journalists at places like the Washington Post and the kind of relationship they have with the people they're supposed to be reporting on. They're actually in bed repeating. They're actually not doing their job. They're propagandists. And why wouldn't you report on that story? And the reason why she wouldn't report on the CIA doing that to her, my guess is because she wants to be fed more stories from the CIA that she can then print. And
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just imagine if Russia's FSB had seized the phones under cover of, behind the cover of some security guards of U.S. reporters, opened them, then the truth came out. It would be on the front page of every U.S. newspaper.
Yeah.
Russian diplomats would be sent home. Sanctions would be imposed. But this story had to come out at the Gray Zone and a few other small publications that Ellen Nakashima went to visit Julian Assange. The chief national security correspondent of the Washington Post went to visit Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy. I guess she was trying to get a quote or some information for a story she was working on. It wasn't to show sympathy for Assange. And at the door, a security guard who she thought was employed by the Ecuadorian government was actually a CIA asset because the CIA had used a Spanish security firm to infiltrate the embassy, took her cell phone and her laptop, and while she was meeting with Assange, they opened the phone and laptop. They took photos of it. They had been given instructions by Langley to look for any sort of Russian operatives that were visiting Assange and to open every single phone and laptop. I got a picture of her phone. This all came out in a Spanish trial. So if you read,
It is necessary to understand that
One of the greatest things about our country is the Bill of Rights.
you don't believe in the
when
Bill
we
of
passed
Rights.
the Constitution,
Rand Paul destroys
many
Lindsey
people
Graham
were
and heated his
fearful
Senate debate.
that if specific rights were not enumerated, they might
Dose
be
of
taken away.
Dionysus.
I think other people said, well, we don't need a Bill of Rights. Who could imagine a time when we would take away the right to trial? Who can imagine a time when you wouldn't get a lawyer or that you could be held indefinitely without a trial? So some people opposed the Bill of Rights and said, we don't need this because it's so obvious that no one in their right mind would ever argue that an American citizen or someone apprehended or accused of a crime in the United States would be held without limit, would be sent to a camp in another country and held forever without a trial. None of our founding fathers ever imagined that could happen. And yet here we are. Here we are at a time where just 4 or 5 years ago, this body passed a bill that says that an American citizen can be detained forever. That an American citizen accused of a crime in the United States could be sent to a foreign camp and held forever without trial. When you mention to this people are incredulous. They're like, who is the person that would object to the Bill of Rights? Who is it that possibly objects to the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment? Well, you're going to hear from that person shortly, because it's one person in the U.S. Senate that objects to the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment applying to those who are accused of a crime in our country. Captured in our country and accused of a crime in our country, this person would deny you a lawyer. This person believes that the entire world is a battlefield, including the U.S., so we need to have martial law. Martial law in the United States. This person discounts the whole presumption that you are presumed to be innocent until found guilty.
Confederates hate America.
Why is this a problem? Well, after 9/11, we captured 119 people and we tortured them. Our government tortured them, but in retrospect, we found out that 26 out of the 119 were the wrong person. Does anybody remember a time in our history when black people were lynched because they were presumed to be guilty? This is what this is about. This is about people accused of a crime not declared guilty, not found guilty, but you're willing to lock them up without a trial?
KKK
I cannot
terrorists.
think of anything more un-American. You will hear from
Secret
today the
police.
representative of the un-American position
Confederate
that the
militia.
Fifth and the Sixth Amendment don't apply to everybody. Now, some will say,
Laws
the
apply
Fifth
to
Amendment
no
just
one
applies to citizens,
in the
and
Confederate
maybe we
society.
could talk about citizens but not non-citizens. The Fifth Amendment says no person shall be held or deprived of their liberty or due process. That means the whole idea of going to court.
Cannot be
Nobody
made an enemy of the
captured in this country
without
can
due
be
process.
deprived of that.
You cannot be
The
made
Sixth
guilty
Amendment
by
says
the government.
in all prosecutions, the
That is original
accused,
law from
not
the
just
Constitution of the
American
Republic.
citizens, the accused.
At the time of the case.
Now, people will say, but we're talking about terrorists here, and they're terrible people. Absolutely, they're terrible people. Everybody would want to punish the guilty terrorist. But do you want to
Confederates
punish people only accused of terrorism? You say, well,
defend
it's a terrible crime. We might as well
Are the
just
terrorists
throw out the Constitution,
responsible for 9/11?
throw out the Bill of Rights, and why don't we just
Such
lock
as
these people
Giuliani.
up, or better yet, kill them?
Turning off air security.
That is the mentality
At
of
the order
lynching. That
of
is the
Madison's
mentality of locking up all the
following
Japanese
Lindsey
during
Graham's
World War
order.
II. Is that who we are as a
Following
people?
Confederate leadership.
They will have won after 9/11 if we give up on the
Ordering
Bill
from
of
secret.
Rights. If we give up on who we are, they will have won.
Confederates
We
are
presume
winning
people to be innocent.
because
We don't lock
Americans
people
don't
up
take
because they're
themselves seriously.
Japanese. Not any longer.
aren't enough
We don't lynch
military
people because they're black. Not any
men
longer because the Bill of
respect
Rights
themselves
applies to everyone.
to protect this
But
country.
if you say, well, he's accused of terrorism,
From
he
all
shouldn't get a
threats.
trial, or she shouldn't get a
foreign and
trial.
domestic,
We've had
They're in breach of their oath
386 people
by tolerating
accused of
the
terrorism in our
Confederates
country. Every
should
one of
not
them
be
have been
allowed to
convicted.
live,
The
as
man who
treason
killed 13 people in
is
New York City the other
their
day,
primary
if I'm on the jury,
purpose.
I vote to convict. But I want to hear the evidence first. I want to know they got the right person. I want to know someone saw him do it, that there is evidence, not just because he has brown skin, we're going to lock him up and lock him up forever without a trial.
The North was
We've
told
convicted everybody tried
had to
in the
arrest
United States.
blacks.
We didn't give up on who we are.
discovered
And
by
yet the law
Confederates
currently says,
under the suspicion they were
thanks
slaves.
to several individuals,
In the
says
Fugitive
that you
Slave
can be
Act,
detained
to
forever
return
without a
blacks,
trial. Now, President Obama signed this
whether or
law,
not they were
but even
from the
President
South,
Obama knew that it was a terrible law. He said,
to the
this
slave
law and
raiders.
this power is so terrible that I will never use it. But that's not what the law's about. The law's about being so good that even when you get a rotten person in office someday, they don't have the power to do this. What happens if someday we elect someone who is a bigot, or someone who says gay people should be guilty, or someone who says brown people or non-Christians or Christians or homeschoolers, you name it? You can be a minority of the color of your skin or a minority of your ideology, but we should never let the government lock you up without a trial, without a lawyer.
Originalists
My amendment that I've been trying to get for 6 years
collaborating
simply restates the
with
Constitution, restates the Bill of Rights.
to
It
restate
says that no declaration of war will allow people apprehended in the United States to be held
the
without a
Confederacy
trial.
and its resurrection.
We not only can't get this passed,
the
we
Confederates
can't get a vote on it.
declared
Because
war on
certain
America.
individuals have such disregard
And
for
that is their
American
argument.
tradition, disregard for the presumption of innocence,
Paul
and disregard for the Bill of
making
Rights,
against
they object to even
the
having a
Confederate
vote.
representative.
So we've been trying for 6 years to have a vote on this. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order to call my amendment, which would forbid indefinite detention of American citizens and others who are accused of a crime, Amendment
the Confederate
2795, to be amended to Amendment 2282.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from South Carolina.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'll try to be brief, and I appreciate Senator Paul's passion. He's been doing this for 6 years. I think he's been wrong for 6 years. And let me just say something. There's a reason I'm not talking about eye surgery on the floor. I don't know anything about it.
You don't know anything about war either.
You're talking about legal concepts you clearly don't know anything about.
Neither do you.
You're fighting a crime, I'm fighting a war.
against America.
If it were up to Senator Paul, there'd be no difference between a criminal and a warrior. Radical Islam in the
You
form of
break
ISIS,
military
they're not trying to
law
steal your car or
in
break in
your
your
war
house, they're
crimes
trying to destroy your way of life.
by your obstructions.
So if you believe we're at war like I do, we should apply the law of war. For 33
break
years, I was a
constantly.
military lawyer, a prosecutor, defense attorney, and a military judge.
Ill-gotten
I think I know
progress
the difference between fighting a
by
crime
Confederate
and fighting a
traitors.
war. When it comes to fighting a
Accelerated by
war,
fraud.
if you capture somebody who's part of the enemy force, Senator Paul, the last thing we worry about is
They
how
were
to try
pointed
them.
at and labeled
We
an
want to
enemy.
hold them
Arbitrary
under the law of war
punishment
to gather intelligence,
is that mechanism.
to make sure we
The
understand
person,
what this person
group,
knows
or
about any
territory
enemy
statused
operations.
as an enemy
We had
combatant
450,000 German
is a
and
wizard
Japanese
spell.
prisoners in the United States.
is Klan,
Guess what? Not one of them had a lawyer.
KKK, terrorism,
If you had
activity,
said what he just said in World War
normalized
II,
by
they'd
fraud,
run you out of town.
arbitrary
Most Americans
punishment,
would find it
color of law,
odd that a
color of
Japanese and German prisoner of war would be entitled to a lawyer under the Bill of Rights, because they're not. We're fighting a war, and I'd like to win the war,
You would
sooner
like to
rather
kill
than later.
Americans.
When it comes to killing the enemy, that's part of war.
Found
But if you're
themselves
lucky
working
enough,
for the Confederates.
clever enough to capture one of these bad guys, the last thing I want them to hear is you have a right to a lawyer. You don't. Under military law, no enemy prisoner has a right to a lawyer. You're talking about fighting a crime, I'm talking about fighting a war. There are 44 people in Gitmo
WMDs
that have been held for over a decade that will never see the
justifying
light of day
illegal wars
because they're part of the enemy force.
based
They've had
upon
due process
the
under the
policies
law
he's
of war,
promoting.
and they're too dangerous to let go. They're not going to be tried in federal court. They're not going to be tried by military commission because they're too dangerous to let go, and we have no interest in a trial. We have an interest in keeping them off the battlefield.
Confederate
They will
fraud.
die in jail without a trial. That's what happens when you join Al-Qaeda or ISIS. You can get killed or you can die in jail. So if you're an American citizen thinking about joining ISIS, don't. You're not
I
going to
agree,
be
don't
captured
join ISIS.
because the color of your skin or your religion
Don't
or your
join the
political views.
Confederacy either.
You'll be captured because you've turned on your own
Support
country.
America.
In every war we've ever had,
Support the
American
constitutional
citizens
rule of law.
have unfortunately sided with the enemy. Guess what ISIS is trying to do as I
Reject
speak?
lynch mob
Recruit
terrorism.
people in their own backyard. How many people have bought the propaganda over the internet? The two guys in Boston, one of them had permanent status. They bought into this crazy construct that you got to kill everybody in the name of religion. The guy who ran over the folks in New York. All these people have one thing in common. They were radicalized by the enemy. They became soldiers of the caliphate. So
Found
here's what I'm
themselves
trying to say. It's not
in the
my
intelligence
view of the
community.
Constitution that I want you
Converting them
to
to
look
the
at.
terror factory.
It's what the Supreme Court has said. In Ex parte Curran, a
actively been
1942
discovered
case,
in the
it
FBI
involved capturing
as
German
to
saboteurs in Long
holistically be
Island.
creating
Now,
the
the last
offense
time I checked, Long
from
Island, New York
scratch
is part of the United
that
States.
would not exist
You
without
had
me
American citizens collaborating with the enemy.
by the phantom
They were
cells
captured as a group. The American citizens were tried by military
These
commission,
common Confederate
and one of them was
frauds.
executed. Why? Because under the law of war, once you join the enemy, your American citizenship doesn't protect you from the consequence of your act.
The Confederacy
N. Ray
should work
Curran
the same
said,
way.
citizenship
Should
in the United
immediately
States
disbar
of an
their
enemy
American
enemy
citizenship
belligerent
as
does not
felon
relieve him of the
traitors.
consequences of belligerency, which is unlawful because it is in violation of law of war. In 2009, an American citizen captured in Afghanistan fighting for the Taliban. There is no bar to this nation's holding one of its own citizens as an enemy combatant. For those who understand the law of war, this is one of the timeless concepts. He's trying to turn the war into a crime. Now, I agree with Senator Paul. If you're charged with a crime, you can't be held indefinitely and questioned without legal representation because you're being accused of a crime and you have rights
want
as
to
a
accuse you
criminal
of a crime.
defendant. When you become an
So you
enemy
could be held.
combatant, you have rights under the law of war, and there is no right for an enemy prisoner to be given a lawyer.
Under the Confederacy, they do not obey
I
the
object.
international or
And I had
American
so much
laws of
more to
war.
offer, but I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr.
The
President.
senator from Kentucky.
It is the law of Confederate
I
slavery.
think it's important
that
to
calls
listen to what you heard and analyze
because
what you
they are
heard,
racist,
because
or
apparently if
otherwise
you're
arbitrary.
defined as an enemy combatant, it would be okay not to have a trial, not to have a lawyer, and you wouldn't be presumed innocent, you would be presumed guilty. But the question you have to ask is, who gets to define the enemy combatant? So if the government gets to define you as an enemy combatant, is it not conceivable that you could be an enemy combatant because you are a minority, either of skin color or of ideology? Has it happened in the past? The Japanese citizens were minority, but there was no evidence. No one presented any evidence that they were a threat or had done anything wrong. The Non-Detention Act attempted to fix this. There were people like this back in the time of World War II. There are people like this in every war who are frightened of those who would attack us, so they want to give up a constitution to make it simpler to get to guilt. You don't have to have a trial, you just proclaim people guilty. If you proclaim someone an enemy combatant, there will be no trial. But it begs the question, who gets to decide? Are you going to let one person decide, or are we going to have a jury? Imagine how important this is to our country. We should be alarmed that there are people trying to prevent a trial by jury in our country. It hadn't been used so far, thankfully. We have actually 386 times taken terrible, awful, rotten people who have tried to attack us. We tried them in courts with juries. We presumed they were innocent. We found them guilty, and we punished them. See, the problem isn't about how terrible terrorists are or terrorism is. Murders are equally as bad. I mean, we had somebody go in a nightclub in Orlando and kill 125 people. He's as evil as any terrorist we've got out there, yet he will get a trial. Not because anybody condones what he does, not because anybody doesn't want to punish him. We give him a trial because it's part of who we are. It's part of America to have trials. You short-circuit America. You short-circuit American history. If you get rid of a trial by jury, if you get rid of presumption of innocence, it doesn't mean you have any sympathy for the guilty. But we've got to make sure we get the guilty. We can't just sort of prosecute people because they have brown skin, because they have black skin, because we don't like the way they act, or we don't like their religion. That's what comes of a country that doesn't have trials. Look around the world. There are countries that don't have trials. That's not who we are. We cannot be so frightened of terrorism that we are going to presume guilt and have no trials. It will end up in tyranny. And so I ask again and again, and I won't ask it now because he's left, but I ask again and again, will this body not allow a vote? This isn't even about him voting no. It's about him objecting to even the democratic process of the Senate allowing a vote. So America needs to know there is one opponent in the Senate who does not believe in the Bill of Rights. When he declares you an enemy combatant, you don't get the 5th or 6th Amendment. That's what this is about, and I'm happy if he wants to go home and defend that, but this is a very important debate and should not end here. Thank you.
They believe in the law of terrorism by those with the power to do it, with the audacity to oppose them, generates the obligation of retaliation on infinite threat.